Right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a media literacy lecture series. The library, our bread and butter is literacy, and we've also discovered and recognized that part of that is not only information literacy, but also media literacy. So we have a lot in common with the journalists of the world who are trying to inform the public so they can make healthy decisions for their lives. And so we have invited Sierra Bailey, who is a local division editor for Embarcadero News. Did I say that right? Embarcadero Media, yeah. So she's gonna come and share with us the best way to responsibly use media. This program would not be possible if it weren't for the funding of the Friends of the Library. So up front we have Jan, who is secretary for Friends of the Library. She has some great information for how to join this organization, which is really the fundraising arm of the public library. It's a great opportunity to volunteer and be a part of something special in the community. So without further ado, I am gonna invite Sierra to the stage. I should say that the handheld mic will be for questions.
Oh, yeah, okay, I will say that. You know, I didn't find out what was the best place to put this today, but we're gonna try it like this. There we go. Jacket was a little too thick for it. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here and spending a piece of your Saturday afternoon with me. One quick housekeeping thing before we get started is that Emily has a handheld mic here. I like to kind of pause and take questions throughout the presentation. So if you have anything, a comment or question, just put your hand up and Emily will come around with the handheld mic so we can capture your question on video. Awesome. All right, so we will get started. So this is part two. We had part one last week and of this series. And so what I prepared is just like a short little recap of last week and just kind of what we went over. The kind of key points were we went through the evolution of mass media and kind of the timeline of where things started to where we are now. We went over the process of stop, reflect, and verify, which is a process to remember as a media consumer of how to kind of train yourself to think about whether news could potentially be fake news before you share it or distribute it to other people. We also kind of went over the differences between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is information that is shared that may be false, but unknowingly so, you know, and then disinformation is false information that is shared deliberately to confuse people or, you know, cause discourse between people. And then so under that umbrella, we also talked about AI and deep fakes and how they can contribute to the spread of mis and disinformation, as well as citizen journalism. And then we also went over several tips on how to counter the spread of mis and disinformation in your community. Part one is, of course, also recorded. So for those of you in the room, I encourage you all to watch part one if you weren't here last week and get more details on each of those subjects. So coming back to this week, as I mentioned last week, we talked a little bit about deep fakes and AI and their contributions to misinformation, disinformation. And then in the days following, this big viral controversy came about involving pop star Taylor Swift and the Donald Trump campaign. So the issue was that Donald Trump's account on his social media platform, Truth Social, shared a post featuring the images on the left-hand side, and they feature AI-generated images that allude to Taylor Swift's support for the Trump campaign, as well as her fans. The post included a mix of real and AI images, and you can kind of see you should be able to see in the image in the top left, it actually is labeled as satire above the headline, but even though it is red, in the mix of everything there, it can be missed. So, part of the thing that we talked about last week was satire, opinion, and things like that not being properly labeled to help people understand when something is not intended to be consumed as legitimate news. So that's one example of that there that I wanted to point out. So then after these images went out, Taylor Swift came out on her own personal Instagram account and posted this, this post on the right. It's very long, you don't need to read it all, but essentially what she is doing is explaining that the images were not real and explaining that she is not a supporter of the Trump campaign. She essentially used her post to endorse the Kamala Harris and Tim Walz campaign. And she highlighted her fears around the dangers of AI. She said, "I need to be very transparent about my actual plans for this election as a voter. The simplest way to combat misinformation is with truth." And so her intention of posting this was to A, share what her true feelings are about the election and also debunk the false imagery that was going around depicting her. So then, of course, Donald Trump was asked later in an interview with Fox Business about, what are his takes on the issue. He said he didn't know anything about the images and he didn't create them himself, but he also noted that AI can be dangerous. He's also been falsely depicted doing and promoting things and saying things that he did not say via AI-generated content. So he did acknowledge that he understands the dangers of AI, and this is a prime example of it. And I do just want to note, too, that while I'm sure there are Taylor Swift fans who do support Trump's campaign, we don't know if these people in the images depicted are real or fake. And ultimately, the issue is still problematic, using AI to create confusion about what's real and what's not. And so this is just another kind of like deep fake example. And for anyone unfamiliar with that term who's here today, it's essentially any type of image or video or even audio that has been manipulated via AI to either depict a real person or a fake person doing or saying something that they didn't do or say. And so this is an example of that. And they are everywhere and they pose an issue all the time. But I will just say during election season, they tend to run a lot more rampant. And this example is one, as well as some of the ones we went over last time too. And so getting back into kind of fake news and what to look out for when you are consuming media, either from websites or through social media. There's a media professor named Melissa Zemdars from Merrimack College in Massachusetts who categorizes fake news into these 4 different types. And so category 1 is a site that relies on outrage, using distorted headlines, contextualized or dubious information. Category 2, circulating misleading or potentially unreliable information, or presenting opinion pieces as news. I kind of mentioned that on the last slide, that sometimes opinions or satire are not clearly labeled as such and therefore can create confusion. Category 3, websites that use exaggerated headlines, inflammatory headlines, and social media descriptions. That's what we know as clickbait. And then satire, like I said, which is meant to be taken lightly in jest and comedy, but they'll have commentary on real life topics, and again, have potential to be shared as factual news when it's actually not. And in category 4, one really good example of this is The Onion. Has anybody here ever heard of The Onion? So personally, I actually like The Onion. I am a person who appreciates satire and sarcasm and kind of the tongue-in-cheek humor, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that over the years, I cringe thinking about how many times I've seen an Onion screenshot or headline or link being shared by someone who thinks it was legit. And so one note on these categories too is that an article or any kind of piece of media content can actually fall into more than one category at a time. And so really it's up to the consumer to really do the legwork to make sure that the information you're receiving is good information. And that's what we're trying to do here in this lecture series, is kind of equip you all with tools to be able to do that. Another note about Professor Zimders is that in 2016, she actually created and distributed a public Google Doc with a list of false, misleading, clickbait, or satirical news sources. And it began as a resource for her students, but it ended up being shared really widely, including by media outlets like the LA Times, among others. And so that list is now very outdated and it's no longer being updated or anything. But within that document, she also included some tips for analyzing news sources, many of which are still relevant, and some we even talked about during part one, such as checking if known or reputable sites are also reporting on whatever story you're seeing. If there are certain sites that you know that you normally get your news from, and you see a different site that maybe you aren't as familiar with reporting on something, you might want to go back and check your go-to sites and see if they're reporting on the same issue. And if not, that could be a red flag. In fact, if there isn't more than one outlet reporting on a given major news topic, that should raise a red flag. That doesn't automatically mean it's fake necessarily. There's a possibility where you could be looking at a site where they were just the first ones to pick up the scoop and other media outlets just haven't gotten to it yet. But I would say that's probably more likely for a hyper-local news source, like the ones around here, the ones I work for, Pleasanton Weekly, Livermore Vine, The Independent. That might be more likely for a hyper-local news source than a major national or international news topic. Other tips from Professor Zimders includes looking out for odd domain names, things that seem a little weird, like if you see like a .com, .co or something that's unfamiliar. A story that has a lack of an author attribution, any type of, really all content should be attributed to whoever created it, but in a lot of cases it's not. And so again, that should also raise a red flag. Opinion content, again, not being clearly labeled as such. If the article is written in first person or is very conversational in the way that it reads, that's usually a sign that it's likely an opinion piece or a blog of some kind. And then if the headline is salacious or inflammatory, again, a red flag. Now I will say, there's a lot of credible sources that might use an inflammatory headline. And at the end of the day, media and journalism, it is a business and we do want people to click on our stories. So, in a lot of cases, we are encouraged to get creative with our headlines or, kind of punch up a headline to make it more interesting or more clickable for people. But it should still truthfully reflect whatever the story's about and not be so inflammatory that it's just meant to appeal to the emotion rather than explaining what a story is about. So definitely look out for those things. I'll just quickly pause here. Wait, Emily's leaving. I was gonna pause and say, but then I saw you over there and you have the mic, so. No worries. I'll pause here and just see if there are any questions and comments on anything I've gone over so far. Okay, cool. We'll keep going. So another kind of component to all of this is obviously AI. Now we talked about AI in terms of, deep fakes and, imagery and videos. But there's also, AI being used to create writing, to create articles. An example of that is ChatGPT, which I'm sure a lot of us have heard of. It's received a lot of broader scale media attention. And there's some pros and cons to a tool like this, and I think right now it's kind of still being figured out at this point, but it is in use. It's out there for people to use and people are using it. So it's important to kind of gain at least at least a basic understanding of what it can be used for in a positive light as well as in a negative light. And so some of the pros of a tool like this, and ChatGPT specifically, is that it can help with efficiency if you're using it for writing purposes. It can help you generate different ideas. And what you would do is you would go into the tool and then you would kind of type in, help me write an essay about, I don't know, butterflies. And it might give you some scientific or historical information about butterflies, written very eloquently, that you can take and use however you will for whatever you're writing. Now, there are people who will directly just take everything that ChatGPT generates and copy and paste it and use it, and that can be dangerous. But then there's also the way that you can use it to just kind of help you generate ideas for your own, for putting the material into your own words. And within that, another pro is that using a tool like this can help make your writing stronger. For instance, even myself as a writer, you've been writing all day and sometimes you just get stuck, you have writer's block, or you think, what's another word to say for this, right? Because you don't want to be too repetitive and use the same word over and over. I love a thesaurus. I will go to the thesaurus to find synonyms to say the same thing over and over without actually repeating the same word over and over. And so this is a tool that can kind of help you do that better, right? It can help you write more eloquently and less repetitive and things like that. And it can also help you save time. If you're in a crunch, you want to do something quickly, again, if you're having writer's block or if you just don't know what to say about something, plug and plop your keywords into this tool, and it can help you quickly kind of develop some ideas about what you want to write about. Now, on the flip side, I kind of alluded to it when I was talking about the pros, but it's the copy and paste thing where you just take exactly what ChatGPT generates and then you use it for your own. That can get you into a lot of trouble because this tool is not 100% reliable. It's not 100% accurate. And it has the functionality to actually completely make things up and just pull information out of thin air. So what most people think happens, and what generally does happen, is if you ask it something, if you ask it to write something about a topic or an issue at hand, it will pull from existing material throughout the internet on that topic. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it hallucinates and comes up with things that you really don't know where it came from. And, I don't need to really go into detail about how that's problematic. And additionally, even when it does pull from legit sources, it doesn't necessarily cite those sources. And it's important to know if you're using this information in an essay or a piece of academic writing, or even for your job, you have to know where the information came from so that you can, have a paper trail and track, if you're asked where information came from. Some other kind of cons to this is that it can stunt your creativity and be used as a crutch. For users who end up depending a little too heavily on it, even if you're just kind of using it as a support and not to get all your information. In the media and journalism realm, it also opens a gateway to plagiarism. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of times it'll pull information that exists already on the internet. Well, for me as a journalist, I work for a media outlet, and let's say I try to use ChatGPT to write an article and it pulls information verbatim, word for word, from one of our competitor news outlets. That's problematic. If I publish that and that news outlet catches wind, or readers catch wind of this being plagiarism, there goes my job, there goes my credibility, there goes the organization I work for's credibility. So again, also an issue there. But whether or not the pros outweigh the cons at this point with AI in general and with ChatGPT, it's relative and largely depends on the kind of the context for how you're using it. So for the examples that I gave, like if you're a student writing an essay, and you're just using it to kind of help generate ideas, or if you're using it to help you draft an email for work, I want to say this in a really professional way, not really sure how to say this, let me go to this tool to try to help me brainstorm how to say that. Those can be beneficial ways of using it. But using it from a media perspective to write news articles and social media content can be dangerous. So those are kind of things to be mindful about too as you're consuming media online was this even written by a real person, right? Those are things that we have to think about now. And ideally, if it is written by a real person, it's typically more reliable. Not always, but more reliable than a machine that you don't know where it's getting the information from, or a piece of software rather. So with that, as you're consuming this media and kind of thinking about, what is real and what is fake, we're being inundated constantly by different sources of information, and we don't necessarily have time to Google every little piece of information about a topic. And so in that regard, there are many resources out there that helps do it for you. Snopes is a very popular one that most people have heard of. It's been around for a really long time. It's one of kind of the oldest and largest fact-checking resources. It started in '94, investigating urban legends and folklore and hoaxes. And then as the demand and the need for reliable fact-checking resources grew, so did the platform Snopes. And it remains a pretty big one and well-known one today. PolitiFact, it is owned by the Poynter Institute for Media Studies, which is a nonprofit journalism school and research organization based in Florida. And they rate the accuracy of claims by elected officials using their truthometer scale. And so if you go to PolitiFact, you can see different articles that has a little meter that'll say if it's half true or partially true or completely false, or like when it's a real, just flat out lie, it'll say pants on fire or something like that, I think. Then we have factcheck.org, which is a project of the Annenberg Public Policy Center of the University of Pennsylvania. And similar to Snopes, they cite their sources at the end of their articles, which again is very important to be able to go back and see, okay, where did they get this from? What made them the authority on this topic to write about it? And then lastly, one that you might not really think about, but LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is a professional networking site where you can kind of create like an online resume of sorts and network with other professionals. But this is a way that you can look up authors of different material and see if they actually have expertise in the field. Now, the one caveat is, we are in charge of creating our own LinkedIn profiles, and so we can put whatever we want on there. So there's that, where there could be people posting things that are not correct or accurate on their LinkedIn. But you can use that to kind of see who has endorsed them for certain skills on their LinkedIn page. Are they in the same industry? Are they connected to others in the industry or whatever company they say that they work for on their LinkedIn? Can you see other connections that they have that also work for that same organization or company? And are there samples of their work? A lot of people will use LinkedIn as a place, because it is kind of an online resume, to showcase their work. And so if you kind of see that they have a portfolio of other things, that can also help you feel more confident about whether this person has the authority to speak on whatever they're speaking on or writing on, etc. Now, this resource is one that I actually came across as a student, Google Scholar, and it's like a subsection of Google, but it's where you can go to look up scholarly literature and articles about court cases, about issues. And this is kind of a little bit more for academic research on a certain topic. You might read an article on a topic that prompts you to want to learn more and know more, but you don't want to just Google and get this massive index of things that you don't know if it's true or false. So Google Scholar is a place that you can go to kind of help find more credible research on a given topic if you want to dive deeper into it. Another resource, and this was actually something that was brought to me. I incorporated it into the presentation later after an attendee from last week brought it to my attention. I was actually not familiar with this with this tool, which is a media bias chart. But I did some research on it in the last few days, and it seems to be pretty legit and a good tool to use, so I decided to incorporate it for this week. And so this is created by Ad Fontes, which is literally, it's Latin for to the fountain, that's the literal translation, but it really means to the source, which is, you know, getting down to the nitty-gritty of where information is coming from. And so this tool was founded in 2018, and its intentions are to combat political polarization and media bias. And so the chart, it rates all different types of news media and puts them on a spectrum from whether they're far left or far right or kind of more towards the center. And the methodology they use actually uses a team of humans, and they have political views from all across the spectrum, and they come together and rate different media sources based on multiple pieces of content. So whether it's a magazine or a site or whatever, they don't just take one article from that and base it. They use multiple pieces of content from that outlet to decide their rating. And so it started off as a manual process, but now they actually use AI and machine learning to kind of help, because there's so much information out there, it's kind of hard to just continue that process manually. But they train their AI and machine learning using the manual methodology that they used for many years. And so the founder and CEO, Vanessa Otero, she was actually a patent attorney who just had a thirst for news and media and really understanding the different biases that different media outlets have. And so when she created this, it was really just for friends and family, and it ended up going viral. And then, you know, the demand for it became greater, and here we are with it still being updated and used today. And so the chart itself is actually free to kind of view and play around with, and you can hover over the different media outlets and kind of see their reliability and their bias scores, which I'll explain more about later. But then there are also some advanced features that are behind a paywall, and you'll have to subscribe to get. But in general, I do recommend checking it out and playing around with that. And you can just go to adfontesmedia.com to find it. So to determine an outlet's reliability score, Ad Fontes considers the content's veracity, expression, its title, headline, and its graphics. And so they add each of those scores to the chart on a weighted scale, and then they take the average of those to create a sample piece of content's overall reliability score. And then with the bias score, they consider language, political position, and how it compares to other reporting and analysis from other sources on the same topic. And then they add each of those scores on a weighted scale as well, and then with the average of those numbers creates the overall bias score. And of course, the actual website goes into a lot more detail, and you're welcome to go there and research and read more about it. This is just kind of a quick overview. But the bias rating, like I said, ranges all the way from far left to far right. And the reliability rating rates sources on a scale from original fact, reporting to analysis, opinion, propaganda, and inaccurate/fabricated information. And so typically with the reliability score, a score above 40 is generally good. Scores below 24 are generally problematic. And then scores in the middle obviously indicate kind of more centralized media. And then with the bias score, it's on a scale of -42 to +42. And the higher negative scores are more left, and higher positive scores more right-leaning. And then the scores closer to 0, again, are more minimally biased or pretty balanced. And so with that in mind, that can kind of help you determine if some of the media that you're already consuming that you don't even realize might fall really far on one end or the other. And it might encourage you to diversify the media that you're consuming a little bit more, which is important to do. It's a valuable thing to do, because otherwise, if you're inundated with the same information that you're already used to consuming, that can create confirmation bias, which we'll talk about here. But I will pause quickly and see if there are any questions or comments before we move.
On the last slide, it said news and news.
Oh, sorry.
On the last slide, it said news and news-like.
Yes.
Is that the media, is that television, radio, print, or all?
Yes, I'm glad you said that. It's all. It's even ads as well. And also I wanted to point out that in reference to news-like content, that refers to like opinion and analysis content as well. But yes, it's all media.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question for you too. We'll comment first. I find it so interesting / funny that it's human analysts.
Mm-hmm.
We have to clarify that they're human.
Human, yes.
But I would just say, like, do you have anything to share with us about how, to be human is to have bias?
Exactly.
And so, I mean, this is the chart where it's somewhere on there. News organizations try to be unbiased, and so they create all these measures and ethics, I think, that you talked about last week. But it's impossible
Mm-hmm.
to not be biased. So I just was wondering if you would have something to say about that, like don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect way to put it. Do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think even the founder here, Vanessa, like I said, she created this chart on her own initially and was doing it by herself. And when it went viral and was shared everywhere, people, of course, were accusing her of being biased. You're one person. How do we know your bias isn't influencing what you're doing with this chart? And that's what really made her develop this team of analysts from all different, viewpoints on the political spectrum to help minimize the level of bias that goes into this. And I think that's really what we need to think about when we think about diversifying the media we consume as well, because otherwise we're just going to continue to confirm our own biases if we're not seeing anything outside of that. Which is the goal of a tool like that. But I agree, there's really, it's inevitable. We're human beings, we're biased, and getting into confirmation bias, we'll talk a little more about that. But tools like these can help us be more diligent and conscious and self-aware to try to, okay, when we find ourselves in that space, let's be diligent about getting ourselves out of that. So I think that's really the goal with a lot of these tools. It's not an end-all, be-all, or either or, it's a yes and. And so going into confirmation bias, we have many different types of cognitive biases as humans, but confirmation bias is one of the most prominent forms, and it refers to our tendency to process information by looking for or interpreting information that is consistent with what we already believe. And so this is innate, and we're typically unaware of our confirmation biases. And so what we have to do, like I said, is be more diligent. So when it comes to interacting with fake news, we're a lot more likely to agree with information that matches what we already believe to be true. And we're less likely to verify information that reaffirms what we already believe. And so this is very problematic. This is largely how fake news spreads as misinformation, because if we already believe it to be true, we're not going to stop, reflect, and verify. We're going to hit that share button. Yep, I already know this. Share with my friends and family so they can see, hey, look, it's not just me saying this. Look at this news organization saying this. But we don't know, if you didn't verify the information, we don't know if that news organization is actually credible or sharing something accurate. So that's how the spread of fake news can continue through confirmation bias. And a lot of times, and this is, I would say, is very much an example of misinformation rather than disinformation, because when we're doing this, we're genuinely thinking we're being helpful because we genuinely believe this information is true. So we're sharing it with our friends and family because we're trying to educate them or inform them rather than trying to deliberately pass off false information to them. So I'm going to play this video about confirmation bias. It's a couple years old, so I started it about a minute or so in because the beginning part just kind of goes over some statistics that are outdated at this point. But the rest of it is very much still relevant to confirmation bias and really understanding how it impacts us. So just so you know, that's why it doesn't start at the beginning. But let's go.
55% of the time. How can we be falling for fake news when we have these things? We have instant access to more information than we've ever had before. Debunking misinformation should be a piece of cake, right? Decades of brain research say no. Turns out, our brains have other plans. A little something called cognitive bias. Cognitive bias is defined as a limitation in our thinking that can cause flaws in our judgment. It's kind of like an annoying brain glitch that can lead us to make faulty conclusions. Fake news often exploits this and our brains love it, even if we're not conscious of it happening. Once we form conclusions, they're hella hard to change, even if we're presented with facts or evidence that directly contradict those conclusions. So what exactly is going on in our brains to make us think that fake news is real news? Why can't facts change our minds? There are many flavors of cognitive bias, but one of the most researched is confirmation bias. We seek out information that we believe or want to believe is true. It also leads us to ignore or minimize facts that threaten what we believe. So here's a study that explains how it works. Back in 2004, during the Kerry Bush election, researchers studied a group of 30 people, half Democrat, half Republican. Both candidates did what politicians do. They flip-flopped on the issues. Then the study asked the participants to analyze what the candidates said. The participants let the candidate in their own party off the hook, but were super critical of the candidate in the other party. When researchers looked at their brain scans, they found that the area of the brain responsible for reason, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, wasn't active. So people weren't using reason when evaluating the candidates they liked, but they were using the part of the brain that processes emotion, the orbital frontal cortex, a classic case of confirmation bias. And their brains were also rewarding them with a rush of dopamine, a neurotransmitter that makes you feel good. So is there any upside to confirmation bias? Well, it can help protect us from ideas that may threaten our social standing and our tribe. Dan Kahan, a law and psychology professor at Yale University, calls it identity protective cognition. We humans are hypersocial, so it's more important to protect our values in our relationships with family and friends than it is to risk losing that by adopting new beliefs. Are you familiar with Tomi Lahren? She's a conservative political commentator.
A protest is a peaceful objection to a grievance. A bunch of sore losers occupying a space is called a tantrum.
But recently, she expressed her pro-choice view on abortion.
No, I'm pro-choice, and here's why.
As a result, members of her conservative tribe turned on her. Ouch. So, how do we defeat confirmation bias? Well, you really can't, but our 3-step plan can help you get around it. Step 1 is recognize. Recognize that you have this bias in the first place. We all do. You made it this far in the video, so you can check that one. Step 2 is consider. Consider that you may not really understand what you think you understand. Researchers call it the illusion of explanatory depth. Let's say I strongly believe that GMOs are bad for me. If someone forces me to explain it, I just might realize that I don't understand it as well as I thought I did. Now, I might be less confident in my belief and more receptive to another point of view. Step 3 is research. Research and break down the opposing viewpoint. You may realize that your understanding of where they're coming from is a bit too shallow. So now you know the perils of confirmation bias and have some tools to beat it. Let's try it out. Without being a smartass, pick a controversial topic and use step 3 on it. Don't try to persuade, but instead use research and facts to lay out why the other side believes what it believes. Put your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex to good use, will you?
play the video. Okay. Any questions or thoughts about what I said about confirmation bias or the video?
Hi. I'm not real clear. I see how to acknowledge and recognize one's own confirmation bias, but how do you combat or maybe intrude in on somebody else's confirmation bias? And, I just was having a fantasy about, let's say, a left-leaning candidate using what she or he would be assuming was right-leaning confirmation bias and inserting it into messaging and then transforming it. Is that a possibility?
If I understand you correctly, yes. If I understand you correctly, yes. I think that.
I'm sort of thinking of AI. Would AI work in here somewhere too?
Yes. Well, I guess there's two parts to the answer of your question. In terms of influencing someone's confirmation bias, that's very much what the social media and search engine algorithms do. We talked a little bit last week about how their intention is to show you everything that you like, or it thinks you like, more and more and more, so that these brands or these products or these websites can get your views and your clicks. So there's very much the opportunity for that. In terms of like an individual person, if you see them sharing something that you are noticing, okay, well, this seems like the result of confirmation bias because they're sharing all from the same types of sources or something, or, all these sources are more left-leaning or more right-leaning. You can call that out. Like, you can't necessarily infiltrate someone's brain in the way that it may or may not change what they decide to do, but you can still call attention to it and say, hey, I noticed that, all these links you shared about this topic, they all come from similar sites or sites that have the similar views or have the same political slant. Have you tried, looking elsewhere to see if that same stance is being taken elsewhere? And maybe they'll think about it and say, hey, you're right, or they'll say, buzz off. I don't know. But there is an opportunity there to do that. But I also think too, and I will say there's a caveat to diversifying the media you consume, and I think it was brought up last week as well, which is trying to make sure that by diversifying what you're consuming, you're not then falling into a trap of, a fake news site or a site that's not reliable or credible. And again, I think just kind of using some of these tools, using some of these ways of thinking, stop, reflecting, and verify, can help you not fall into that trap. But I also think too, we have to be mindful about not assuming that just because a platform does not share our views, that automatically makes it non-credible or false or fake. I think sometimes we do that, where if we see a site, if we're more left-leaning and we see a site that's more right-leaning, we'll say, oh, well, everything they post is fake. That's not necessarily true. They're just publishing from a different point of view. They're publishing with a slant. And that's why it's important to kind of see things from different sides, because most media platforms will have some kind of slant. And it's not that they aren't reporting facts, but they just might only be telling one side of the story or a portion of the story. And that's why you need both to contextualize the full story. And so I think that's what we have to realize, is that, okay, maybe this is just a single version of the story. Let me see if I can find the other side of it. And that's what we need to be cognizant and aware of doing.
Thank you.
Were there any others?
I just had a comment that recently several of us librarians got to go to American Library Association, and Trevor Noah was the guest speaker. And the one takeaway I got from that, well, I got several, but something that really wowed me and stuck with me was he said that when he interacts with people, he tries to consciously go into the discussion as if they're right and he's wrong, which is so hard to do as human beings. But I thought, wow, that is like a level of self-awareness, and then like takes the emotion out of it, so that he can use logic to like have that dialogue. So I just want to share that.
No, definitely. And I love Trevor Noah, so I appreciate you bringing him into this conversation. No, but that's great and a really good point. And I will say, just to kind of hammer it home on confirmation bias, some more specific examples of that, of doing that, is, again, not seeking out objective facts. The goal is to be objective generally, but a lot of the outlets that are out there nowadays are not. They are deliberately intending to sway your opinion and sway your thoughts on things. Myself as a journalist and the organization that I work for, we try to just present the information objectively, present the facts, and then we leave it up to you to decide how you feel about it or what you think about it. Other news outlets, not so much. They want to say, hey, this is what we think and what we feel about this, and you should feel the same way we do. And so that's important to watch out for that. Also, interpreting information to support existing belief, which we've talked about. Only remembering details that uphold your belief. So if you read an article that maybe it does present both sides, but you only resonated with the side that you already believed in the first place. So you might be relaying this to someone, oh, I saw this article about so-and-so or whatever. And you're only, when you're relaying it and sharing it, you're only pulling out, you're selectively remembering the pieces that you personally resonated with, rather than, again, telling the full story. That is an issue in itself too, because that person you're relaying it to, they might not go seek out the article for themselves and actually read the whole thing. They're just going to go off what you told them, and then they might tell that another person and another person, and then that misinformation spreads, or that half-truth spreads to other people, and people aren't getting the full story. So, and then ignoring information that challenges your belief, which again kind of goes hand in hand with not seeking objective facts. If you're not going out of your way to kind of find that full story and find both sides of a story or all sides of a story, then you are essentially ignoring information that challenges what you already believe to be true. And so, and I will say this too, because I kind of alluded to this when I responded to your question, Mary, but social media and search engine algorithms, they do not lend themselves to being aware of your confirmation bias, and that's by design. They can amplify the pre-existing confirmation bias, and so it really needs to be a conscious decision on your part to seek out different types of media. It has to be, because if you're expecting that you're just going to do a Google search and get a mass array of different results on that first page, you're not. You're going to have to dig deeper. Okay. So moving into some real world consequences of not being aware and not being diligent. After all that we've talked about so far, we might say to ourselves, this is a lot of responsibility on the users and on the readers. And we're not all trained and educated in this space. So why aren't these platforms and these outlets doing more to protect us against these issues? Well, for one thing, a lot of these outlets benefit from you remaining in the dark. They're really not interested in protecting you. They just want your clicks or your money or whatever else. So when we're online and we're thinking about the media that we consume and the media that we share that was created by other people, we also have to think about the media that we create ourselves. Your posts, your tweets, or I don't know what we call them now, but I'm just going to say tweets. Your Instagram posts, etc., that you create from your own self, whatever you write in your own words or whatever pictures you snap. You do have to be mindful about what story that is telling. And also what it reflects about you. Because we've all seen several different consequences of information posting online leading to job loss, broken relationships with family or long-term friends, Even impacts on your children. You know, if there's other parents follow you on Facebook and they see you posted something and then, you know, they mention it in their household, their kid hears it, then it comes to the schoolyard and kids are picking on each other or say, or your mom's this or your dad's that. Though it can even have trickle down and have those type of impacts, which I'm sure we've all seen or heard of in some capacity. So it's important to be mindful that it's not just the news you share created by someone else, but also what you create on your own. And so an example here that I have pulled up is regarding the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Are we all familiar with what happened with that? Yes, okay. If not, there's some little bullet points here. But this was a huge, huge data leak, the largest known in Facebook history. And Cambridge Analytica, a data analytics firm that was working with the Trump campaign in 2016, basically harvested a lot of people's data from Facebook. Primarily to use for political advertising. And this was without users' knowledge, without users' consent. And like I mentioned before, you know, Facebook didn't really protect its users in this regard. And like I said, they're not always looking out to do that. Yes, I will pause here. And
I do see that 5.1 billion in civil penalties.
I'm sorry?
I see that there's a 5.1 billion civil penalties was given by Facebook. Did it go to the end users whose private data was compromised?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? The 5.1?
Yeah, billion.
Mm-hmm.
Did that money go to the end users?
Oh, the users.
Whose private data was compromised?
Some of it, yes, yeah. So a portion, some of it was paid to these organizations, the Federal Trade Commission and the SEC. But I think, and I don't want to spread fake news, but there was a some odd 100 million that went to users specifically. And there was a way that you could sign up. It was part of almost like a class action thing that you had to sign up for in order to receive some of that money, some of that settlement, I should say. But that the expiration date on signing up for it has long since passed. But yes, great question. So where was I going with this? So this blew up. This was very major, and there was also a lot of other information that came out of it, which is, okay, was our information sold to other countries like Russia to influence the election? And there was really just a lot of fallout from this issue. And so even though this wasn't necessarily a direct fake news issue, but what it really did was it taught people to start using mindful social media practices. Because we talked last week a little bit about engagement, liking, commenting, sharing on certain posts, and really giving post engagement. You want to make sure as a user that you're only interacting and engaging with content that you really are interested in. Like before you leave a comment on something, think to yourself, is it worth clapping back at that ignorant person under that article link from a site you've never heard of before? Probably not. You should just probably keep scrolling because you don't want to end up in a situation where you are being targeted with potential advertisements or information that is either fake or that you're not actually supportive of. And just to hammer it home, like these sites, they don't really have your best interests at heart. And this is a prime example. As I was saying, Facebook didn't really protect its users in this situation, which was a lot of the response that they received from this, which was, why weren't you looking out for people? Why weren't you better protecting our privacy? Why weren't you better protecting our data? And we can't have those expectations. We should be able to have those expectations, I should say. But that's not necessarily the case. And that's why too, as I mentioned last week, that on a legislative scale, there are lawmakers out there that are trying to put better guardrails in place to be able to protect us better. But we're still working through that because the internet is moving faster than our laws are. And so in the meantime, it's really up to us do our due diligence and really look out for ourselves when we're using these platforms. And that's really one of the key takeaways of the fallout from this issue as it relates to how we consume media. Oh.
One comment first, and then I'll come to you, Mary. Are there other countries who do have better guardrails for or legislation that guards against misinformation, disinformation?
That's a great question. To my knowledge, yes, but again, I don't want to misspeak on which countries those are. I have some in my head that I was going to say, but I haven't done enough research to really confirm that. It's just kind of what I've heard to be true. Obviously, my bread and butter and focus is here, but yeah. Did you have some?
Recently, Brazil.
Exactly, with the X ban. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is exactly an example, but that's something that's new waters for them too, right? And they're receiving a lot of fallout from that decision as well, which again we talked about last week. So, but they definitely acted, faster and stronger than we've done here in the U.S. But that's a great example, yeah.
About a year and a half ago, I was very involved with messaging and attending some online seminars about that. And it was suggested or recommended in those seminars that if we see anything with, let's say, a political figure or a message that we don't like, rather than clicking for yes or no or angry or whatever, that we leave it alone. Is that still true? Because otherwise, again, the idea was that if we click it, regardless of how we feel about it, it puts more clicks on social media, they get more exposure. Mm-hmm. Is that still true?
Exactly, yes. It is true. To an extent, I think, depending on what it's from, there might be value to clicking it, because if it is a credible or reliable source that it came from, it could be part of diversifying what's online. If you know that it's not, or if it's something inflammatory, like I mentioned earlier with what to look out for when looking at fake news, if it's something that is very inflammatory or salacious that you're seeing, it's probably going to be something that's just meant for you to click, or clickbait, or it's meant to confuse you, or spread disinformation. And so it would be better to just leave it alone if you're seeing those red flags.
Okay, because since the debate, there have been all kinds of things out on social media disparaging one of the combatants. Mm-hmm. Okay, and my political leaning is to click on the negative message for that particular combatant, and there are many, many of them. But then I'm having second thoughts about that and thinking maybe even though it's from a group that perhaps I agree with, that I should just leave it alone. So I'm a little confused.
Mm-hmm. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're seeing things that you agree with that could be inflammatory, and you personally want.
They'll show the picture of this person, and show that his words, okay, which I don't agree with, and then they're disparaging it, and I might click it and say, yeah, I think that sucks too. Mm. But it gives him more exposure.
I see.
Stage.
I see.
I'm a little, it's confusing.
I see. That is a tough one. That is a difficult choice, because you don't want to spread that imagery around and give that person more visual time. But the message attached to the image, you're saying you do agree with. Yes.
Yeah, if it disparages them, or if they're laughing at it, making fun of
it.
Right.
You might feel the instinct to share, but then you don't want it. Got it. Okay, yes. That is a hard one. That is a tough one. What would I do in that situation? I probably would just err on the side of caution of just leaving it alone. I don't think if you were to share it because it's disparaging,
I don't share, it's just clicks.
or if you clicked it, right? If it's something that so there's the one hand where you click stuff, you engage with stuff, and then you start seeing more of it. So if the content is something that you might not mind seeing more of because it's making fun of or disparaging something that you would feel the same way about. So I don't think there's necessarily harm there. If it's something that you agree with and you click on it and you wouldn't mind seeing similar content to that, I don't think there's harm there. There can be harm though in sharing that to others. But if you're not asking about sharing, you're just asking about clicking, I think it's fair to say that if the actual content of whatever the article or the post is, I think it's okay to click if it's not something that you think is going to be harmful if you see more of it. But you should be aware of that. You probably will get inundated with more of that because the algorithm is going to be like, oh, Mary loves this. Let's show her more and more from this group or from this site or whatever.
As long as it doesn't say Mary loves the picture of Donald Trump.
Right, right. And it won't say that, but it will show you just similar content either from that group or presenting the similar message that whatever that post was presenting. So I think that's fair game. But I will say that if there is a time where you are confused and you just don't know what to do in a situation, I would err on the side of caution of just scrolling past. Or maybe if you are going to share it with someone, tell somebody just by mouth, like, look at this funny thing I saw, but don't actually share it out to your following where it can get screenshotted or reshared or retweeted or whatever. That might be a way around it too. Mm-hmm. Okay, I was going to share the video that I shared last week, but everybody who wasn't here, those who are still in the room were already here and have seen it. So I won't replay it, but it was just more information about the social media do's and don'ts, particularly during election season. So I guess we can wind down here. We're finishing a little earlier than I intended, but we can have a dialogue in that case.
I just wanted to comment on your comment. I do the same thing. Well, if there's something that I agree with, I'll click like. And then aren't we just gearing toward only seeing what we want to see? Because that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, you're feeding it.
More and more content that I like.
Mm-hmm.
So now everything I like has to be cats or
Yeah.
dogs or whatever.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly.
But that's what happens.
Exactly.
So it's kind of scary. It's like when you're talking about eye drops and then,
You see all
of a
the
sudden
ads
you're in
for
the
all the
news.
different
Yeah,
eye drops.
so
Yes.
It's hard to say what should I be liking and clicking on.
It
I
is.
just wanted to make that comment.
It is, and it's a very personal choice, for you and what you want to do on your platform. We are feeding it. If you're on social media, or online, there's really no way around that. But that's why, in this presentation and in general, I'm suggesting that if you're aware of this and you're cognizant of this, you can be more diligent about saying, okay, it's been 3 days and I'm seeing all these cats. Let me go, you know what I mean? Like, let me go try to diversify what I'm seeing or what I'm looking at. Let me go research something else. Let me go look at lizards, now. So you have to be self-aware enough to make that switch when you're noticing, okay, all of this is all coming from similar platforms. All of this is similar information. Let me mix it up. Again, you also have the option too, I think I mentioned this a little bit last week, but if you feel like you're being a little too inundated by something, whether you like it or not, you can always choose to hide it from your feed and kind of trick the algorithm in a sense where it'll decide, oh, she no longer wants to see this anymore, and even with me, I mentioned last week that, I was, I was pregnant, I had a baby. And so a lot of my feed was all these like pregnancy memes or pregnancy products and all these things. Well, now I'm no longer pregnant. I don't need this information anymore. So now I'm clicking hide and, unfollowing pages that I followed for that type of information. So that's a way that you yourself can kind of, trick the algorithm or just be more diligent about mixing things up.
Yeah, I would comment that, so we do have the ability to like curate our social media, and so by choice, I choose to click on news sources that are on an opposite end of the spectrum than I might, identify with, and also I have plenty of family members and friends who are also on the opposite side of the spectrum. But I just feel like it makes me more informed to see what people think, how like the diversity in opinions to, for instance, after the debate can be vast. And so for me, especially since I work in public services, it's good for me to kind of see where everyone's at. And so I tend to prefer just like that sort of diversity.
Sorry, I'm so sorry, Emily.
That's okay. Otherwise, we're just like living in these siloed communities. And I think then that creates like a lot of potential opportunity to just be out of touch.
I agree. Great point.
I don't know if it's the same philosophy that you're sharing, but I keep thinking of, and I don't recall his name, but there was a Chinese emperor who said to know your enemy. And for that, I sometimes go to other sources to see what people are thinking.
Yeah, I think like the concept is similar, but just I think the approach is so that I don't have enemies, but I have empathy, and understanding. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with them. And like we talked about last week, I do think like what I need to challenge myself to do more of is speaking up, especially like when family members will post something that is just wacko. A good example that was 4 years ago when a lot of conspiracy theories were circulating about people who worked for elections, and I thought, oh, that's like, these are public servants like myself, and there's like a process to counting all the votes and stuff, and so just sharing like fact, sharing PolitiFact or on that topic, and just kind of like, it's matching that free speech with good information.
I always hate to forget names, and I just looked it up. His name was Sun Tzu, and the complete quote is, know your enemy and know yourself.
I just wanted to call out too that when I was talking about fact-checking resources and I kind of went through Snopes and PolitiFact and everything. I wanted to call attention to the fact that obviously we are in a library. Libraries are great places to do research on things too, outside of, online. And like I said, if you come across something, a given topic, you might read an online article that makes you say, hey, I want to dive more into that. I want to learn more about this topic. Could be lizards. You can come to the library and you can find, credible academic literature, resources, or research materials to learn more about that given topic. And I think everyone here, obviously, we all know that. But I think it is important to call out and call attention to that because there is benefit and value in getting offline sometimes. And that is where I will leave you, unless there's anything more to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sierra.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And thank you to the friends of the Livermore Library.
Thanks for doing this organization.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Now I'll go next door and check with my Spanish
Are they still
conversation group.
meeting?
What?
Are they still meeting?
Yeah, they'll be here for another 20 minutes.
Okay.
Are you learning Spanish?
Sí, yo hablo español.
Oh, wow.